So welcome, our brilliant colleague Surabhi. We so appreciate your consistent leadership and solidarity. And as always at SETC, begin all things by giving thanks to the original stewards of the various lands around. We give thanks to all our ancestors, all those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We give thanks to all our elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, and learn together for collective liberation and sovereignty. So, Surabhi, can you please introduce yourself to our listeners and viewers and share a bit about your remarkable background?
Yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity, Victor. And absolutely love that land acknowledgement. Thank you for honoring and recognizing not just the stewards of the land, but also the elders and people who've come before us. I really appreciate that. So I'm based out of Toronto, and I recognize that as an immigrant, I'm quite fortunate to be able to be on this land, to be able to play, to dream, to sleep, to work, and to really contribute and give back. So I am the executive director of the Workforce Funder Collaborative. It's an organization that was started 4 years ago. I was hired to bring this little kernel of a vision to life and create an organization out of that. So 4 years later, we've been doing grant making for 4 years. We funded 25 organizations, not a huge number, but two or three of these years were in the pandemic. So as you can imagine, it has come with its own challenges. Uh, so the Funder Collaborative has 8 funders that have pooled resources, and we operate at the intersection of systems change, workforce development, and philanthropy. And I say systems change prominently because we're looking at systems change within workforce development as well as philanthropy. So how can we be doing business differently? So as such, we're a funder that funds for systems change in workforce. And from a philanthropic perspective, we've tried to change our processes. I wouldn't say we're entirely a trust-based funder, but we follow a lot of principles. And the big thing that we follow is making sure that our funding is aligned with relationship building and trust in the organization, in the work they do, and supporting them so they can advance and achieve their goals. And real quick, outside of the Funder Collaborative, I also run a women's leadership program called Women in Power that brings together white women and racialized women to share their experiences around systemic inequities such as patriarchy, race, gender, that they experience at work and how it's similar yet quite different. So we use a storytelling approach to narrative change so we can move women leaders towards inclusive leadership and allyship while focusing on inner work.
That's absolutely incredible. What context and a comprehensive yet intersectional approach to really transforming systems. So once again, I applaud your leadership and all that you're doing for so many. So my next question is, what's inspiring you right now? What has you curious or what's keeping you up at nights?
Oh my God, such a loaded question, Victor. 3 questions in one. Let's see which one of these I can get to, and I might come back. So what's inspiring me, I think, is the resilience of the sector. There's a lot of challenges that the nonprofit sector has, and a lot of the immigrants that come to the country, the challenges they face in finding jobs, retaining jobs, sustaining their families, achieving the Canadian dream, because that's what they're coming for from their home countries. So, how do we help them realize those dreams? How do we make sure that they have the support system? And how do we make sure the organizations are set up to support them? I think that is what is inspiring me, keeping me up at night at the same time, and also something I'm curious about is how do we make sure this sector is serving the people it needs to serve, is not just focused on outputs and producing people to just get jobs, any jobs, but ones that are meaningful that line up with their skills and ones that make sure that we're fully capitalizing on the skill set, the knowledge, the lived experiences that so many immigrants, refugees, and other individuals bring to this country.
Indeed. Thank you. So what are some of the challenges and barriers you and your colleagues encounter? And what are some of the approaches you're taking to overcome some of these challenges and barriers?
How long do we have for these challenges and barriers? Because I have a long list, right? But I'll start with a few, and I'm sure we can sort of get deeper into this. I would say first is the biggest challenge within the nonprofit sector as a funder. that I see is capacity building. So I know that nonprofit organizations don't have anybody that's funding for capacity building. And that's not just capacity building to do their work better, but it could be capacity building from an organizational development perspective. It could be capacity building in ensuring the programmatic work gets and we, as the Workforce Funder Collaborative, actually do invest in capacity building. Our model of operation is that we give you funding, but we also give you capacity building and one-on-one consulting and thought partnership and brainstorming. So we meet with our grantees every month to make sure that we can support them. And we like to say that, our role as a funder ends once we've decided you're getting the money and you've signed the agreement. After that, we're showing up as a consultant. We're not showing up as a funder because what we want is to make sure that your projects are successful. It doesn't help us to give you the money and then just be waiting for the 6 month report and say, oh, you didn't do this. And 1 year later, you didn't do this. That doesn't help anybody. What helps is to say, like, okay, let's meet, tell us what is not working, let's bring additional resources. And these additional resources don't have to be dollars. Sometimes it's like, oh, XYZ organization has done this in another part of the country. Why don't you talk to them and see how to overcome that challenge? Because a lot of times thought partnership is what leads to capacity building. It's not necessarily just funding, just money. The second challenge, I think, is silos. I think the way the current funding structures are and the models, they pit nonprofits against each other and force them to operate in silos. They're not encouraging partnerships. They don't encourage them to be able to share the outputs and outcomes. As a result, many organizations end up just going at it alone. And we know when you go at it alone, you can only go so far. So then it becomes challenging for them to be able to achieve what they want to achieve.
Thank you.
I would, yeah, I was just going to add one more thing. And one more thing is just the systemic inequities that exist for racialized BIPOC individuals and uh, the biases that exist that make it hard not just for those individuals to access services, but individuals leading the organizations to be able to show up fully as a leader. I think that is another challenge in the sector.
I couldn't agree more. I've worked in the sector for a little over 2 decades, and everything you said reigns so true, especially when trying to harmonize demand side and the supply side of capital or funders and
Yeah.
grantees. So once again, I really appreciate you just being candid and transparent around this work, and obviously looking at the future and how we evolve the sector in a way that makes sense for everyone. So once again, I applaud your leadership. And it's a perfect segue to my next question. Do you have a set of key priorities right now in your work you'd like to share with our listeners and our viewers?
Yeah, a few different things. So I have already mentioned about capacity building. I think that's going to continue being a big piece for us. And that's not just for our grantees, but for the sector. We're interested in exchanging conversations and building up the sector. And we're going to try and do some of that this year. Definitely a big priority for 2025 for us. I think I'm also interested in creating learning circles, both for the nonprofit sector, but also for the philanthropic sector where we can just come in spaces to learn from each other. Just learn. Like there's no need to advise, there's no need to comment. Just hear what somebody else is doing. I think we just don't have these spaces where there's no competitiveness, where there is no ask for a partnership, whereas you know, there's just no space to be in community. And I'm a big fan of community circles where we just harness each other's learnings. We understand what innovation is looking like in these spaces, and then have conversations about how we can make this bigger instead of just, again, being in those silos. I think one other thing we're trying to do at the Funder Collaborative is for so long, we've been funding organizations and nonprofits to address the supply side, which is the labor side of issues. And we're not holding the employers accountable in terms of what they need to do. So what we also want to do second half of this year and definitely 2025 is start engaging employers and maybe employer associations to see how we can be holding them accountable in terms of providing better jobs, ensuring immigrants, refugees, internationally trained individuals have access to good jobs, and making sure that there is an upward mobility path for people, irrespective of where they start. So I would say that. And then last but not least is continuing to address the power imbalance that exists in a funder-fundee relationship. I'm going to say, proud to say, we've done a lot of work in consciously addressing our own biases and creating processes and systems that move us towards equity. But there's never enough. There's never enough in a relationship where somebody holds the purse strings and somebody has to come ask you for that money. So, how do we continue to get closer to each other and not be so far apart on that spectrum and really not have a power imbalance so we can, you think of that seesaw and we're both at the same level versus up and down. That's what we're moving towards or hoping to get towards.
I love that. I love that. So my second last question, what is your ultimate goal? And what does success look like and feel like to you and your colleagues?
Okay, so the ultimate goal would be a thriving nonprofit sector that is not siloed, that is really focused on systems versus outputs and outcomes. So we can start to address some of these systemic inequities more deeply. And what would success look like would be being able to work with like-minded organizations, nonprofit intermediaries, employers, other funders, so we can dismantle some of these systemic barriers that are preventing the marginalized communities to move forward, to be able to invest in community-driven solutions that are more inclusive, and to be able to advocate for systemic changes at multiple levels within the government and other philanthropic community, quite honestly.
Thank you. Thank you. So my last question, do you have any closing thoughts or calls to action for our listeners and our viewers?
Oh God, a lot. But I will say, just for the philanthropic community, I would love for us to come together and be a little bit more forward-looking. I think a lot of times the philanthropic community is basing grant making on what was accomplished last year and not what is going to be accomplished moving forward. I'd love for us to not be a performance evaluator for nonprofits. Instead, be dreamers with them. Instead, be thinking about the possibilities that are possible to achieve and not just be harping about what has not happened. The second, I would say, I'd love for us to do a better job at building trust with the sector and not showing up as the big bosses, people with big dollars. Uh, we know that if there's no buyer for our big dollars, we can be sitting with all that money in our purse and do nothing with it, right? So again, it's a two-way street, right? Like if I'm trying to sell something, somebody has to want to buy my product. So if I'm trying to give money out, somebody must want my money. So how can we build trust and relationship with the sector so that we can together advance the agendas that each of these organizations have? So really moving away from transactional to a partnership model.
I love that. That transactional to a transformational model or to a model that makes more sense for all people makes sense.
Yeah,
I think a lot of times when we think about the amount of capital in philanthropy in Canada, there's so much more could be done with some innovation
totally.
and some will. So once again, I really
Absolutely.
appreciate you just amplifying that message to our community of practice and all that you're doing for so many. So Surabhi, I so appreciate your visionary leadership, your tenacity, and most importantly, your commitment to community development. And it's always at Setsi.
Of course.
We close this conversation, this interview, the way it began, by giving thanks to the original stewards of the various lands we're on. We give thanks to all our ancestors, all those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We give thanks to all our elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, and learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. Thank you so much. I so appreciate you, fam.